All right, everybody, welcome in. Sorry for the delay of a minute. Apologies. Welcome. You're in the right place for the online ColdFusion Meetup. It's been a few months. Sorry about that, too. We're working on that. We have some other talks coming up soon, but today we have our 291st edition of the online ColdFusion Meetup being recorded on Thursday, October 28th, 2021 at noon U.S. Eastern Time. I'm Charlie Earhart, and I'll be your host. And we've got Brad Wood giving his talk using LaunchDarkly for feature flag management in CF applications. Brad, thanks for that. Looking forward to the talk. And you can go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Charlie.
You bet.
I'm just posting the YouTube link in here in Slack to tell my lazy coworkers to come in and listen.
There you go.
There we go. All right. I've got YouTube open in one monitor here, and I'm logged into the chat. So if anybody has any questions, I'll try to keep an eye on that. This is the benefit to having 78 screens on my computer. Okay, so this talk just came up last week. I did some work with LaunchDarkly, which is a feature flag management software, and I thought, well, that was kind of cool. So I did a little internal presentation for the my coworkers at Ortus, and I thought to myself, well, this would make a nice little online CF meetup presentation. So I pinged Charlie and said, hey, what if I talked about this real quick? So I don't have any slides. I'm just mostly going to kind of demo and talk about things. But the concept of feature flag management is something that's been around for a while. They're just feature flags in general. I always liked the idea of feature flags, and they made sense to me. And I'll kind of explain that here quickly what that means. I always thought using the library, however, to manage it always seemed kind of silly. Like why do I need an entire library just to write an if statement with a Boolean variable, yes or no, right? I can just do that myself with a ColdBox setting or something like that. But I found a lot of really interesting kind of robust features in the world of feature flags, and specifically in the product of LaunchDarkly, which is a specific company that provides the service. The idea of feature flags is sort of intertwined with a lot of Chris Tremaine in the chat noticed I have a piano in the background. Alas, that is nothing but a green screen. But Charlie and I did discuss how I would love to have a grand piano in my living room, just like the fake picture behind me. So anyway, feature flag management is very intertwined with kind of the agile movement of developing code. And of course, agile programming has been around for a long time, but a lot of agile is about shorter iterations, shipping code more often, and being able to respond more quickly. That's a lot of the core values of agile. And so shipping code more often is a problem if or seems to be a problem if you're at a company, and I've been there at companies where you get a big development request and you work on it for 6 months, right? And then no code gets shipped because you're all typing code furiously into your keyboards. And finally, after 6 months of testing and internal reviews, you push all that code to production. That's not a very agile approach. That's a very waterfall approach. And so you want to be able to, first of all, have, part of the features up and maybe being shown to a select audience. You might want to be able to be, demoing that to the, your CEO, in a location possibly available only to him on production. And you want to be able to iterate over those features. And so you also don't want to shut down development at all. You want to be able to still have other features and other bug fixes that are going to production in the meantime, without this whole problem of, oh gosh, we can't push the code that we have in development to production because we have everything all broken and we're halfway through the development of this new feature. So this bug fix is going to have to wait 3 months. Because I've been on the customer side of that. In fact, just recently with an online company I won't name, where they told me for months, they told me they couldn't fix any bugs because they were in the middle of rewriting the entire system and they didn't have any, they just couldn't do that. And I thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And your customers think the same thing about you. All those dirty, evil thoughts they have about you when you tell them we're in the middle of a new feature, we can't ship any bugs. So this is where feature flag comes in. And the idea is that it's a very generic principle. And when I demoed this kind of internally to the Ortus team, I had a lot of people ask questions about, well, could you use it for this? Could you use it for that? The answer is pretty much, yeah, you can use it for whatever you want. So you can have, maybe a new functionality, which could be a button, it could be a new menu item, it could be a new portion of the page, and you can have that just show up or not show up, right? A simple feature flag. It's either it's on or it's off. And ultimately, what that looks like in your source code is an if statement, right? I mean, at the core, there's nothing incredibly complicated about the concept of feature flags. You have some new button you want to test on your homepage that, click here to launch the nuclear missile, right? And you don't want it to show up until you're ready, but you want to go ahead and get the code pushed out. And maybe you want to have that code present, but just kind of quote turned off. You have basically an if statement around that hides it, right? And that's basically what we call a feature flag. So the most common feature flag would just be a Boolean setting, is something on, is something off, and you have your code respond to that. And so when you're writing code, instead of ripping out the old code and just putting the new code in, and then now having a code base you can't ship to production until you're 1000% certain you're ready to ship that feature, you can have the feature there all along, but hidden behind that if statement. So you're ready to turn it on whenever you want the public to see it, or turn it on for certain people, which is a bit more complex of an if statement now, right? Turn it on for people with a certain role, turn it on for people shopping in Canada, right? Those kind of flags. And so this allows you to do a few things with your workflow. It allows you to have fewer branches. If there's one thing that's the bane of my existence as a developer, is branches. I hate branches. I hate feature flag branches just because of the management, the overhead that comes with them, right? And if you have 3 or 4 people working on 3 or 4 features that may or may not be ready in particular times, you have 3 or 4 feature branches that they're constantly having to rebase and figure out when they merge it. And once they do merge it, gosh darn it, that feature's there now. You can't pull it back out without reverting the merge. But what if everybody was working on trunk or on your master branch, whatever you call it, at the same time, and each group of people were using feature flags that would just hide their behavior. And even if it's not a UI facing behavior, maybe it's just a way that that dollars and cents are calculated in your shopping cart behind the scenes. But somewhere in that chunk of code, you have that if statement that says, if the old behavior is active, use this calculation. Otherwise, if the new behavior is active. I mean, and you can use, object-oriented programming, subclassing. You can have different implementation CFCs. You're just switching which one gets called. It doesn't have to be messy. But you are always incurring a bit of technical debt when you put that if statement in, assuming it's not going to be there for all time. But imagine if everybody was on the same version of a code, and that code was what shipped to production every time on a regular basis, and those features that weren't ready were just turned off. And that's kind of the basic fundamental idea behind feature flags. From what I've heard, and I've never worked for Facebook or GitHub, but from what I've read, companies like Facebook and GitHub release to production multiple times a day. I've heard that GitHub has production releases up to 5 to 6 times a day. Imagine if your company pushed new code, new features, bug fixes to production 5 to 6 times a day. And of course, this all goes hand in hand, in addition to the agile development I talked about, with CI and CD, the continuous integration, continuous deployment, which means you've automated the crap out of everything, right? If you're not in a place where you can push a button and your code deploys to production, this is still useful for you, but it might not be as useful as it could be. I can guarantee you when GitHub, does a deployment for the 5th time in the afternoon today, somebody's just pushing a button to make that happen, right? There's not people manually diffing files like I used to do years ago, back before I ever had anything automated. And so if you're adopting things in which you commit code and pipelines run, it runs your test, you can push a button, the code goes to production. It's low effort to just say, oh, I fixed a bug, click, it's in production. And the work that's in progress that's not ready is sitting behind cleverly placed feature flags to keep an old behavior in place until a new behavior is ready. Then you can get in a place where suddenly, pushing to production isn't this sort of terrifying thing where everything has to be ready or everything has to be held out in feature branches. And that's a very freeing place to be. And the good news is you may be thinking, well, I don't use Jenkins or GitHub Actions. I don't have a lot of integration or automations. That's fine. That doesn't mean none of this applies to you. I'm just kind of showing the best case Ferrari scenario of all the pieces working together. You can still manually deploy to production once a month and get use case out of feature flags. So, like I mentioned, I don't really have any slides, so I'm just going to kind of dig in and show you guys through the code and through the interfaces. The website here that I've had up while I'm talking is LaunchDarkly.com. There's a handful of libraries and sites that do feature flag management. I'm demoing LaunchDarkly to you today because that's what I've been playing with. I recently wrote a ColdFusion SDK to allow you to use LaunchDarkly's service in your ColdFusion code. Mary Jo Sminkley from CF Web Tools had a client that wanted to use LaunchDarkly. She'd seen Ben Nadell. He's blogged about this quite a bit. And so she came to me and said, hey, can you write an SDK for us so we can use it easier? Because they used our Couchbase SDK and they like that as well. And so I dug into it. I found out a lot of stuff I didn't know about feature flags. And I thought this is actually pretty cool, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So I'll tell you right up front, LaunchDarkly costs money. So keep that in mind. I'm not affiliated with LaunchDarkly, and if you pay them, I don't make anything. But just so you're not thinking this is a bait and switch or anything, you do pay LaunchDarkly money to use their site, and they have a lot of really cool features, and you can get a starter plan for like $8 a month, right? And then it goes, I don't even know what their enterprise stuff costs, but just so you understand that expectation. And so one of the things about the feature flag management coming through a service like LaunchDarkly is, in the past, when I always thought, well, why would I want to have a library? I could just use a setting in ColdBox, right? Who cares, right? Forget about it. Update the setting, blah, 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 save the file. With LaunchDarkly, the actual database that stores the flags are all stored externally on their service, right? On their database server. And so when you go to change a flag, you log into their website, and that's where your nice, pretty management console is that shows you the flag, shows you are they on, are they off. And there's several main benefits to that. And just so you can see it, I'll go ahead and show what you see logged into. I realize that there's kind of a lot of stuff on their screen. And I'll be honest, I had to click around for a couple of days before it all started to like make sense. So I apologize. I know the effect when you're first demoed something you've never seen, and a lot of things on the screen can be confusing, but I'll try to explain it and go slowly. So when you log into a LaunchDarkly account, first of all, you can have multiple projects. It's one of the first questions I had. So if you're thinking we have 4 or 5 websites that we would want to, maybe use feature flags in, within a single LaunchDarkly account, you can create multiple projects. So here I have a project called Test Suite, which have all of the feature flags that I literally use for the test box suite of tests for the SDK itself. In fact, here is the here's the actual test box runner for the LaunchDarkly SDK that I wrote, because we believe in test-driven development at Ortus. So I wrote tests as I went for each of the features to make sure I didn't break stuff. And so I created a project that had a basic version of every possible type of flag. And then I also have a little sample app project, which goes with a little sample application I'll demo here in a couple minutes. There's also the concept of environments for each project. So my sample app project has a production environment and a test environment. And of course, this makes a great deal of sense. You may have a feature turned off in production, but you want it on staging where you have, QA people testing. So you can create these environments. They don't have to be called test. They can be called staging, QA, whatever you call them. These are kind of the defaults they give you, but these can be arbitrarily named. So creating a feature flag, you do here through the interface. You give it a, oops, my cursor has to be in the box if I would like to type. So, they give it a name. Oh, wait, I forgot. The name can be, see, I'm still learning this. The name could be a nice human readable name. And then there's this sort of a key or slug that you use in your code, which typically just does kind of the hyphenated thing. You have a description. You can organize them by tags. So if you have like a large number of feature flags, and then there's 4 types of flags that LaunchDarkly supports. The most common one that everybody thinks of and that I've kind of been using in my examples is the Boolean flag, right? There's a feature, it's either it's on or it's off. So, you have a variation, and they call these variations, by the way. So each flag has 1 or more or 2 or more variations. So we have, the new function and the old function, right? And you can arbitrarily name these so, it makes sense to you in the UI. And so with a Boolean flag, you only get 2 variations, and they're kind of just hard-coded, true and false, because that's what Boolean does. And then you get to choose when the flag is on, which of the 2 variations do you want to serve? So, okay, new function. When the flag is off, which of the 2 variations do you want to serve? Okay, we'll serve the old function. So this is your basic run-of-the-mill feature flag. When it's off, you have some old functionality firing. When it's on, you have some new functionality firing. That is a string. So a string variation allows, or a string feature flag allows you to have any number of variations, and these are just literally strings. So whatever you want them to be. So your code would need to place meaning on each of these values. So, and I'll show an example of each of these. So, you're customizing maybe the welcome banner that users see when they log in, and you want to play with a couple different variations of what they see. You could use a feature flag that's a string, and each variation type has, the string of whatever you want to display, right? Or maybe it's a setting you want to use. Of course, these all, get to have their own names. I mean, Chrome is trying hard to autocomplete each of these. Oh, look at this. You can't create variations of the same name. Well, look at you, LaunchDarkly. Aren't you clever? And then, of course, we get to choose which variation to serve when the flag's on, which variation to serve when the flag's off. Now, you may be thinking, well, wait a minute. If you have more than 2 variations, how would that work if the flag can either be only on or off? Don't worry. We'll get to that. It's much more robust than just on and off, right? That's just the starting point. We also have a number variation type, which, sorry, the UI, their UI is incredibly helpful, sometimes almost the point of annoyance. It's constantly saying, wait a minute, do you want to navigate away? You might not save your changes. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Just leave me alone. So the number variation does exactly what you think. They're just numeric values. So maybe you want to control how many columns of content control on the home page of your site. You want to be able to switch between a 2-column layout to a 4-column layout, right? That's your basic numeric. And then the last one, which is kind of cool, is a JSON type of variation. And this allows you, again, to have any number of variations. And in this case, these can basically be just like straight up JSON, whatever you want it to be. And it can be, struct, it can be an array. I wouldn't recommend having the different data types between the variations. That might be a little confusing. But this is kind of cool because you can cram whatever information, whatever data you want into each variation. So it's not just an on-off, variation, or a this string or that string variation. You can have, a complete struct full of, settings and information, and then your code responds to it. I see Chris asked in the chat, this is a permanent flag. I'm not 1000% sure the difference. I think it's if it warns you. You can mark this flag as permanent. If you intend to keep it in your code as long-term control, we won't prompt you to remove permanent flags, even if one variation is rolled out to all your users. Okay, so I think they have some, and I've only been using this for like 3 weeks. I think they have some features where if you leave a flag off or on for a long time, they'll start to prompt you and say, hey, are you finished with this flag? You should probably go remove the code. And that's actually kind of a good point, because there's a couple different ways to use feature flags. There's the sort of temporary technical debt you incur when you roll out a feature that you ultimately intend for everyone to use, and you have this kind of like half on, half off period where you're, turning it on or off or making it available to some people. But at some point in time, you reach a point where all the users on your site have the feature, and then you go back and you just delete the if statement, you delete the old code path, you delete the old files, and you clean up that technical debt, right? That's kind of one use case. It's also possible to use feature flags on a permanent basis, where maybe you just want to build in some behaviors to your application that treat different users differently, right? People in the state of Kansas all get a different picture on the homepage of the site than all the other people in the country, and you just want that to be a permanent behavior, and you want to use feature flags to control it, as opposed to just writing your own code to do so. Then you can just say, this is a permanent flag. I'm going to use this forever and ever. I'm never removing it from my code. Both code paths are going to live on forever. But ultimately, this checkbox just controls the nanny mode, I think, of it bothering you. Okay, so those were our 4 types of feature flags, and I'm not going to actually save that. One thing I mentioned that the LaunchDarkly site tries really hard to help you. Anytime you make a change, you can't just turn a flag on. You always have to confirm what you're doing. You have to confirm, the environment. You have to. They have an entire like approval process, which for big companies they eat this stuff up, right? They don't want some random dude to come in and click a button and break the website. Who approved this, right? You can have an entire approval process where a manager with approval permissions can come in and say, "I approve this change." You can always add a comment explaining, like why you did it, almost like a commit message. And then they keep this audit trail of who changed it and when and why they changed it and who approved it. And you can even, I hit escape. You can even schedule the releases. So you can say this feature will go live automatically on October 30th at, midnight, right? And so that kind of brings into what I was, a point I was edging around, excuse me, a point I was edging around earlier, which is if I just said, forget it, why do I need a library? I can just make my own Boolean variables as ColdBox settings. I can, or application variables, whatever, stick them into the code, use them. The downside of that is a developer has to make the change. There's no visibility outside of people who can look at and read your code, and you can't change the setting without another push to production, right? Those are the downsides of just putting the stuff directly in your code, which is what I kind of always thought, why wouldn't I just do that? The benefit of having this sort of as a service, website here is anyone in your company who you give a login can see it. That includes your CEO, your marketing people, your businessy people, people you would never let touch your ColdFusion code. They can log in and say, hey, is the XYZ feature on or off right now? And you say, I don't know, log into the site and look, right? Anyone can see it. Anyone can change it anytime they want with auditing trails and approval processes. And it can be changed without having to release new code to production. Those are kind of the big features of extracting the actual storage and management out of your code into this separate service that your code is just talking to. And that's actually kind of a really cool thing for companies that want to be able to have, the marketing team decide when they want to release that feature on an idle Tuesday afternoon by just clicking a button. And, the ColdFusion people are all out to lunch at the time. Well, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not after lunch, but you get the picture. So the scheduling, the approval process, the comments, and by default, it's actually even more strict than you see here. They make you even like type in the name of the environment, like when you delete a GitHub repository, and it's like, are you sure? Right? I actually turned some of those settings off because they were really starting to annoy me. Because I'm just trying to, go in and make changes all by myself. And it was projects. It was constantly asking me, are you sure? Are you sure? Every time I would do stuff. So when you go in and you edit these environments, there's where did it go? Sometimes it's actually difficult to find settings in this. Here we go. Enable secure mode, require comments for flag and segment changes, require confirmation for flag and segment changes. And there's even more. Yes, close it. See, I tell you, it was always looking out for you. And then approval settings, right? Require approvals for this environment on all flags or all flags matching the following tags. They have all of these settings that play to a bigger corporate kind of thing that want all of these approval processes in place. I don't care about any of that because I'm just like one dude playing with this, right? But if your company is into that stuff, that's a really good bonus feature. And of course, we had this history tab here, which I have apparently chosen a terrible example because there is no history. Let me see if I can find one of these flags that actually has some history. I deleted and recreated a bunch of this yesterday just to kind of clean it up because I had so many test flags. And so my history was much more interesting prior to yesterday. Here we go. So here's a particular flag called product page. We'll look at it in a few minutes. And you can see this history. Brad Wood created it on this date. Then I updated it to this. I updated this. And you can click on the details. So, I mean, they have all this auditing stuff. So it's kind of cool. Okay, so feature flags. I think you guys all understand the basic things of feature flags. The second thing LaunchDarkly does is it tracks your users. And this is actually kind of cool. Excuse me. So when you and we'll show what this looks like. It's pretty simple. In your code, when you say, "Hey, LaunchDarkly, what's the current variation of this feature flag?" You don't always do it, but you can do that, and you want to do that, in my opinion, in the context of a user. Assuming this is not a public site where everyone is anonymous, right? It's not just, is this feature on? It's, is this feature on for Bob Smith, right? And all the data about Bob Smith, who has this role and lives in this state and has this email address, right? And you can get very granular, which is where the real power comes in, because it's not just a simple if statement based on a true-false variable. It's, does Bob Smith have access to this right now? And so you see a whole bunch of test users. These are from some testing, and I'll show you that test that I did earlier. And then here's an example of a more realistic user, right? So one of my users, spoofed, of course, is Luis Mahano, and we can click in here and see information about it. We have his email address, we have his IP address, we have his full name, we have an overview of all of the flags as Luis sees them when he logs in, which may be different than other people when they log in based on all of my settings. And then this thing role here, this is a custom parameter or custom attribute that I just made up, and I pass to LaunchDarkly, and I say, hey, there's something you need to know about Luis. He's an administrator, right? And we'll look at this earlier. I can use this to customize my segments of different people. Jim Priest asked in the chat, are there different account levels in LaunchDarkly so you can control who can create flags and who can turn them on and off? Absolutely. I've done very little testing with it because I've just been testing myself. I believe that's all under roles, and I haven't created any roles. But I've read this, fine-grained access control for everything in LaunchDarkly. So I have never even clicked this before this in my life. Test role, blah, blah, blah. Resources, allow, deny, all actions. Yeah, it looks like you can create all sorts of interesting things. Oh, yeah, look at this. So I can filter down to very specific things. I can say this role is denied access. Oh yeah, look at this. Holy crap, you can go crazy with this. Delete experiments. There we go. People with a test role cannot delete any experiments on the activate cool flag. So yes, Jim, the answer is you can apparently go nuts with the permissions, which is exactly what you would want in a scenario where you wanted people to be able to view but not screw up the system. Okay, so we have users. Pretty straightforward. And LaunchDarkly just automatically builds this list of users as the SDK hits the service and says, can Bob Smith see this? Can Luis Mahano see this? Can Brad Woods see this? LaunchDarkly just remembers all those users. That's fine, Jim. I love being sidetracked. I have ADHD. And so this list of users just happens automatically as your users use your site. And you can even see when the users were last seen. You can tell I was last testing this about 18 hours ago when all these users showed up. Now, we also have this concept of segments, which is something that I'd never even considered, which I think is where the real power starts to come in, because I have a segment here called VIP user. And again, this is a segment I just created of my own design. And you can define these segments to be however you want. You can include specific users. So you could create a segment called test group, and you could go put 15, explicit people in there as being part of that segment, or you can exclude users, right? Oh my gosh, this one person complains every time we change the site, exclude him from the group of people we're going to enable this feature for. Or you can create these rules, which are super cool. So this VIP user segment, I have a rule that says role, which again is a custom attribute I made up. I came up with the idea of role. LaunchDarkly lets you just create arbitrary things of your own design. Role is one of admin. And you remember I'm passing that through, and I'll show you in the code. It's very simple. I pass the role to LaunchDarkly. LaunchDarkly just saves it. So what I've defined here is everybody with a role of admin is automatically in my VIP user segment. And you can create as many of these as you want, and you can base it on any possible chunk of data that applies to the user. And then this segment can be used as sort of a singular cross-cutting layer where you say all of my users in my site that match this segment, which can be, where they live, any kind of custom data that they've passed, their email addresses, their IP address, any of those you can make be part of a segment. And then we can use this to kind of target what sort of variations different users see, which is where the real power kind of comes in. I'm going to wait to talk about experiments and debugging. I'm not going to demo anything in here, but just for what it's worth, they have a boatload of external integrations with source control systems, pub sub, like, Azure pub sub style things to send data to, Bitbucket pipeline, Circle CI. I didn't even have a chance to play with all of these, but LaunchDarkly has these like out of the box integrations with all kinds of crazy stuff. Single sign on. It's pretty cool. I just didn't have enough hours in the day to mess with them all. But with our basics of feature flags and users, let's dig into our code a little bit, because the library itself, the SDK, is really pretty easy to use. There's nothing complicated about it. What I did is I took the Java SDK, because LaunchDarkly has out-of-the-box SDKs for all the main languages that people care about. And they also have client-side SDKs like JavaScript, which can do like link click tracking, can do a lot of really cool like browser-based stuff as well. And you can use them hand in hand. You can be doing JavaScript, feature flag management and ColdFusion feature flag management at the same time using the same account. So I took the Java SDK and I wrapped it up in a ColdFusion SDK, which does I deal with all the annoying Java objects that you have to deal with otherwise. Unpacking all the statically typed stuff. I provide Luis helped me. They have several parts of the Java SDK where you provide lambdas. And so that's not an easy way to do that from ColdFusion. So you can just give closures, good old-fashioned ColdFusion closures to the CFML SDK. We wrap it up all nice and pretty so the Java SDK sees it as a lambda. And there's really only one component you need to care about, and that's LD, which stands for LaunchDarkly. I named it short just so it would take up as little space as possible in your code. And LD is kind of a convention that LaunchDarkly uses for a lot of their stuff. So LD is just the LaunchDarkly client. And so I actually need to add a couple things, but 95% of everything you need to know is covered right here in the README. So you do not need to have ColdBox to use this. You can use this also without ColdBox. And if I didn't mention it, this can be used in an application which also does not have ColdBox, just in case that's not clear. The demo I'm showing you is a ColdBox application because it's quick and easy and simple. But I wrote this for someone who wanted to use it in a non-ColdBox site. And so I wrote it, first of all, to be able to just be a complete standalone thing. But if you use ColdBox or even just Wirebox standalone, it'll do some nice things out of the box for you, but it's all optional. Installation, you type install LaunchDarkly SDK in command box. And for the first time in my life, I did not try to load the jars automatically out of sheer fits of frustration with the fact that Lucy and Adobe, Lucy supports it, but Adobe doesn't yet. Adobe, to this day, does not support a generic way to be able to add jars into a class path purely programmatically without editing your application.cfc, which drives me bonkers. Maybe someday they'll figure that out. Lucy provides that, but of course, my client needed this in Adobe ColdFusion, so Lucy's functionality was rather worthless. So you do need to add the jar into your this.java settings, which just looks like this, right? Here's the jar. I like to do this. This is a little trick I always do. Load pass takes an array of jars. So I just do a recursive directory list on any folders that I need to, that I expect to be jars in. And I just let the array that comes out of this just be the array that load pass uses. I like that. That way, if I move stuff around or add additional jars in, they just get picked up automatically. But you can do whatever you need there. So let me actually start. Well, I'll show all three. Well, I'll show two. So I'll start with the I'm not using ColdBox version, which is here. So if you're not using ColdBox, no problem. It's really easy to use. The only trick is you want to make sure you only create the library once and you want to store it somewhere so it behaves as a singleton. So that basically usually means the application scope. You don't want to recreate the library every time you use it. It'll work. It'll just be really slow because there's kind of a lot of load up and shutdown stuff. It's only maybe half a second, but you don't want that happening every time. So in a non-ColdBox environment, we just create the LD component, and you would adjust this to wherever you actually have it stored. We'd store it somewhere like the application scope, and then you pass into the constructor a struct of settings. And we'll talk about what the settings are. The minimum setting that we require is the SDK key, and you get that from the LaunchDarkly website, right? You come in and you under your account settings, you look at your projects, and each environment has a separate SDK key, and so that's what you plug in to here, and the SDK automatically connects to the LaunchDarkly servers. That SDK key is both your authentication as well as telling it, who you are and what project you're connecting to. That's it. That's the minimum it requires you to be able to use with it. And the only other trick is it is important that you call the shutdown method if you have any kind of like reinitialization functionality in your site, some kind of URL flag you provide that recreates all of those application CFCs during development. You don't want to just keep recreating LaunchDarkly because it has resources in the background. It has in-memory caches. It has connections to the remote server and things of that nature. And you want to make sure you call the shutdown method before you recreate it. That's really the only caveat. If you use this in the context of ColdBox, the shutdown is taken care of for you. It's part of the magic of interceptors and life cycles that are built into the ColdBox framework. So if you're using this in ColdBox, then you install it like before. You provide your settings in the coldbox.cfc in the module settings struct, which if you're a ColdBox developer, this should be familiar to you. So you have a LaunchDarkly SDK. It's the exact same struct. It's just in the ColdBox settings file. And then you don't need to worry about shutting it down. It's automatically shut down along with the module lifecycle. All you have to do is just inject it from Wirebox and say, hey, I want LD for the LaunchDarkly SDK module, and then you call the variation method. So pretty much all of the usage of this flows through this variation method. This is how you ask the question of LaunchDarkly, hey, what current variation is active? And there's two things you have to pass. You have to pass the feature key, and that is what shows up here. So product page, the key is the sort of hyphenated version. And what's kind of nice is anywhere you see this on the LaunchDarkly website with the kind of a little box around it, you can click it and copy it to your clipboard. Super useful when you're doing development. You can just, in fact, I think you can even do it from this main page. Let me try it. Yeah, boom. Anywhere you see this, you can click it and copy the exact string to your clipboard. Makes it super handy. So we say, hey, LaunchDarkly, what is the current variation for this feature key? And then you always have to give a default value. The default value is served if the LaunchDarkly SDK is offline, if the website can't be reached, if there's some error getting the value, if the key isn't found. And this ensures you always have a graceful failure of any kind of problems, and your site doesn't just blow up because the internet flickers and LaunchDarkly API goes down for a few seconds. You'll always get the default value. And if you watch your server logs, you'll see messages in here if you're hitting like keys that don't exist. You're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm just serving the default value here because I've never heard of this key. So that's basically what you do. And what you get back from this variation method, it will be a Boolean or a string or a number or JSON that's been deserialized based on whatever the type of feature was. Now, the fact that I'm using this just directly inside of an if statement means that I'm assuming this is a Boolean type feature flag. This obviously wouldn't work very well if I were to get struct back. Those are really the basics of just creating a feature flag, sticking the library in, and then writing some code to pull based on it. So there's a handful of things. The only one I think I'll really dive into is the user provider. And by things, I mean settings. I will talk about this, but I won't demo it. It's really cool. You can register. Actually, let me scroll down to where I had the documentation for it. Blah, blah. All right, so listening for flag changes. If you want to go like whole hog on this and you want to have your website like immediately, like your code immediately respond whenever a flag gets changed in the LaunchDarkly website, you can provide a closure in your settings a flag change listener closure, which I have here using the little arrow syntax. And when someone goes on to the LaunchDarkly website and they come on and they click, boom, and they change a setting, instantly that pushes a notification across the wire to all of your ColdFusion servers running the SDK, and immediately runs the code in your closure and tells it, dude, a flag just changed, like right now, here's the flag key. And then you can respond to that however you want. Clear caches, notify users, update some data somewhere, right? And they even have another listener called Flag Value Change Listener, where you say, I want to monitor this flag in the context of this specific user. So if the variation changes for this flag and this user, I want you to run this code, which right now you can see just does a write dump, flag test change from old value to new value, right? So you can do some really cool, like instantly updating stuff where your ColdFusion code gets like pinged within milliseconds of somebody hitting save on the website. That's not a requirement, but if you want to like do that, it's a really cool feature and they support. Anyway, so that works. I won't demo it. You can see my unit test for it. It's very easy to test. So user tracking. This is pretty easy. Well, I mean, it's easy with the ColdFusion SDK. It's a pain in the butt with the Java SDK. User tracking, every single function in the LaunchDarkly SDK, and there's quite a lot of functions I'm not even talking about, like get all flags, just give you a big dump of every single flag for the user and what their variations are. They all have an optional argument called user, right? And you can pass that explicitly as just a struct, and the unique ID, the required key you have to pass, is called key. That's how you uniquely identify that user from all the other users. And you can pass that at the point of use by just providing a struct. Or what you'd actually want to do is in your configuration, you provide a user provider closure. And the LaunchDarkly SDK will run this closure every time it hits the SDK, and it'll use this logic to determine who the heck is logged in right now, and it'll pass all that data along to LaunchDarkly. So this goes in your configuration struct, which is either passed to the constructor in standalone mode or is in the ColdBox settings in ColdBox mode. And you put whatever the heck logic you want inside of this, right? So in this example, I'm saying if session.key exists user. So if session.user exists, I'm assuming there's a logged in user. Then I return a little struct literal here. I have the key, which is important. That's the only required bit of information, which is the ID. I have a name, an email, and a country, right? Oh, look, I have invalid JSON. I have an extra trailing comma. Boo, I'll fix that later. So you can pass whatever you want. There's a whole list of baked in properties, and you can also just make up your own crap like role or whatever you want. You cram it in the struct, and we'll give it to LaunchDarkly. Otherwise, if the user's not logged in, we just return an empty struct, and that will create an anonymous user, which is a special type of user that says nobody's logged in. And you can even target anonymous users in your rules. So this is very important. And if you have logged in users on your site, you're going to want to implement this. I would recommend not running queries, if at all possible, just to make this as fast as you can. So you're going to want to, pull data out of session or whatever. But you can base this on whatever you want. You control the code in this. And as long as you declare this user provider closure, then you don't need to pass that user struct every time you call the SDK. The SDK will just be automatically aware of who's logged in, and it will automatically begin tracking all the details of the users here in this users tab. Okay, so let's dive into our little demo here. There's a bunch of additional functionality in the SDK, but I don't want to get too far off in the weeds. You can read the README. I'm just scrolling through just to make sure there's nothing just incredibly earth-shattering that I didn't talk about. I'll talk about this, the ability to track arbitrary events that users do, because this is actually really cool, but it's part of my demo, so we'll do that. So if you want to play with this example I'm going to demo, you can do this. Do I have it open? No, I don't. So the code for this is on GitHub. And let me just hold up. Now, it's called LaunchDarkly ColdBox example, but there's very little in here that's specific to ColdBox. I used ColdBox because where's the option to open in GitHub? There it is. I used ColdBox just because it was convenient, and it made for a nice little demo. But everything I'm doing with LaunchDarkly in this, you can absolutely do in a standalone application. You can clone this repo into a folder, BDW409S, LaunchDarkly ColdBox example, and you can just type box install. And I have a box JSON in here, which specifies the ColdBox framework and the LaunchDarkly SDK, which will get installed. And you can just type box server start. The server will spin up, and it will just work. Now, here's the cool thing. You don't have to have a LaunchDarkly account to use my test app. Yay! And the reason is... right here. The reason is LaunchDarkly supports a couple different types of like test data sources. By default, it connects to the LaunchDarkly website and it pulls the feature flags from there, right? That's the typical use case. But for unit testing, right, which is exactly what I was doing with my unit testing suite, I want to have an exact set of test data that's the same every time, that's kind of set in stone, that doesn't require, you know, a remote HTTP call to be made to the LaunchDarkly API. So they support file data. And of course, I have support for this built into the ColdFusion SDK as well. You're welcome. They support file data, which is, here's a JSON file that has all of my flag data. And it looks like this. Ironically, this JSON format is not documented. There's basically an endpoint in their API you can hit that will just puke out all the JSON for the flags you've created in the UI. And that's the recommended way of creating this JSON. But if you read through it, it's pretty straightforward. So all the flags are kind of defined in this JSON file. And you just specify it like this. I want to use file data. Here's the JSON file. And if the JSON file updates, I want you to immediately pick up those changes. So this is great for testing standalone stuff. And these are uncommented by default in the repos. So if you just clone this repo, box install, server start, it'll all work based on the JSON data. And if you want to if you're thinking like, geez, my boss is really going to like this, I'm going to go sign up for a LaunchDarkly trial account. No problem. All you have to do is provide that SDK key, comment this out, and it'll start connecting to your LaunchDarkly account. Now, I'm using Get System Setting, and if you're not a ColdBox person, you might not know what this does. This just simply gets an environment variable or a Java system property of this name. And in my case, I have a .env file, and I've put my SDK key here. Of course, this is the example file. And then I have this get ignored from source control. And of course, I'm using the commandbox.env module, which automatically reads in this environment variable and makes it accessible. And so it all just comes together, and ColdBox is able to pluck that environment variable out, and my SDK key is used. And that keeps me from committing my SDK key to the source control as well. So this example will work out of the box for you. It's really cool. There's another type of test data LaunchDarkly supports, and it's called, I guess it's called test data, actually. You can basically programmatically change it on the fly by calling methods on an object. I won't demo it. It works. It's pretty cool. The JSON did everything I needed, so it's what I focused on. So really quickly, ignore the parts you don't care about, but I've got the LaunchDarkly SDK installed right here in my modules folder. I'm using ColdBox, so that's where it goes by default. I've got in my application.cfc, I've got my little cut and paste this.java settings, which points to where the lib directory is. And that jar is inside of the module right here. This is our LaunchDarkly Java server SDK jar. And then I have my settings here in the ColdBox config. So module settings, LaunchDarkly SDK. I have my SDK key. I have my user provider, which basically looks like what I just showed you guys earlier, except for I got the role in there. And then I've got my data source, and I've got it hard-coded in here to our JSON file. Now, for the sake of our demo, I'm going to comment these out because I want my test app actually hitting the online data so we can demo it. And this is what my little beautiful test application looks like, which is very similar to the out-of-the-box ColdBox sample app, which may or may not be what I based this on. Okay, I admit it's exactly what I based it on. I ran ColdBox create app, and then I just started piling stuff on top of it. So this is a very simple ColdBox site. Of course, there's nothing ColdBox to what I'm doing with LaunchDarkly. And the first thing I've customized is our little welcome message. So let's take a quick look at this. In our main views main index, this is where our welcome message is output, prc.welcome message. And that is defined here in our main handler. So I'm injecting LaunchDarkly into my handler. And if this was not ColdBox, you would just reference it as application.ld instead, or wherever you've saved it. And our welcome message, if you've ever seen a ColdBox sample app, this is usually just a hard-coded string, right? But instead, I'm saying ld.variation welcome message with a default value of sup. So if the server's down or the flag gets deleted, the users just see sup, right? And Adrian Sanchez in the chat, yes, you are correct. You could basically use LaunchDarkly for free and control everything through JSON. Now, you lose all the benefits I talked about of the nice, pretty UI, the auditing trail, right? You know, the ability to do it without code changes. But you're absolutely correct. If you're willing to give those up, you could do it entirely through JSON. That would work. So let's take a look at my feature flag. I have a feature flag called welcome message right here. And it's a string feature flag. And I have two variations right here in my variations tab. Variation 1, variation 2, and variation 3. So variation 3 is just our default ColdBox welcome. It says welcome to ColdBox. I have the important people variation, which says, hey, baby, looking great. And I have normal users, which says, welcome back, peasants, right? So these are the three variations. So this is an example of a flag that's not just on-off. It actually has different behaviors and functionalities. When the flag is off, if the flag is off, I want it to be the default ColdBox welcome. That's what I think I want it to be. Let me change that. So let's see here. If I turn off targeting, so I turn off the flag, I know it's multiple clicks because of all these are you sure prompts. And I refresh the page. Here we go. So the flag is off and we have the old school behavior. Welcome to ColdBox, right? I just hit refresh. And when I hit refresh, this call right here, ld.variation welcome message, returned a different value than it did before because this actually reaches out and hits the API. Now, in case you're curious about the overhead of those behind the scenes HTTP calls, they have a whole caching layer in place that makes this super fast, right? And that's why those change listeners are so important because the caching layer is automatically updated when you change stuff. It's actually a really cool system they have. So I can come in, I can turn on the flag, save change. Yes, I'm sure. I'm quite very sure. And now I get welcome back peasants because going to go to the right tab, variations tab. When the flag is on, I want to use the normal users variation. So I turn the flag on, it changed to the normal users variation, which is our welcome back peasants. So I'm doing some targeting on this flag. And you guys remember that VIP user segment that I created, which applied to administrator users? When the users are in the VIP user segment, I want to serve the important people variation. Otherwise, fall through and the default behavior will be just the normal users, right? And there's a lot of really powerful stuff you can do here. I can add prerequisites, which can say only target if this flag is set to false. So you can chain flags together, or you can control secondary flags with primary flags. There's all sorts of this insane stuff you can do. You can target individual users, and I have an example of that earlier, so I won't show that right now. Right now, all I have is, let me go out. Yes, leave. It really, really doesn't want you to leave if you haven't saved. It like freaks out on you. Don't leave, come back. So what I have is everybody who's a VIP user will see the flag. So let's talk quickly about my little fake login that I concocted. Right now, we're not logged in. I can log in as Brad. Yay, logged in as Brad Wood. I can log in as Luis. Yay, logged in as Luis Mahano. And I can log out. And that's not a real login. I just faked it. I faked all of it. Don't tell anybody. So my login method literally just says, if the user is Brad, I just set this session user and my role is user. If the user is Luis, I set this session user and his role is admin, right? And then if you log out, I just delete the user object. So I'm just kind of faking an actual user. So remember, Luis has the admin role. That places Luis in the VIP user segment. And that means the welcome message feature flag will serve the important people variation for Luis because he's a VIP user. Hopefully all those pieces make sense together. I didn't want to make it too complicated, but I wanted to kind of show how really powerful this can be. So when I log in as Brad, I still see welcome back peasants. But when I log in as Luis, hey, baby, looking great. So Luis gets special treatment when he logs into the site. He's an administrator. Therefore, he's in the VIP segment. Therefore, the flag serves a different variation for him. And this is where a lot of power comes in because this is where it clicked in my brain that feature flags didn't just have to be an on-off feature. They could be like actual just different variations of behaviors based on different subsets of your user base. And you're probably already thinking all sorts of crazy cool stuff you can do with this. And the whole thing is, this is all the ColdFusion code is. LD.variation welcome message. I don't change that code at all. All the configuration happens right here in the user interface by maybe a marketing guy, right? Let your marketing team worry about who sees the flag. Your job is all of a sudden really easy because I've seen some wicked complicated if statements in people's code to try to approximate this kind of behavior, right? This is the benefit, and this is why they charge you money, right? Okay, so there's our welcome message flag. Works like you expect. So, and special people like Luis get special treatment. Boring people like Brad get called a peasant. I've also got another flag here, which is a just a basic Boolean flag. And it's called the activate cool. Activate cool. Since it's a Boolean flag, it only has two variations, but I've named them. So I have the boring variation and I have the more cats variation. Now you might be able to guess what this is going to do. So when the flag is off, I want to serve the boring variation. When the flag is on, I want to serve the more cats. Now I don't have any targeting in place. So this is just going to be on or off for everybody, right? There's no such thing as if they're in this segment in this case. So my flag is off. I can click on, save changes. And again, don't forget you have these really cool things like scheduling changes, right? Doesn't always have to be right now. I refresh the page and now we get a cute little picture of a cat. So this just represents a feature, a button, a behavior of your site that's either there or it's not there. And I like the cat, so I'll leave him there. So I'm going to leave my activate cool on. The cool has been activated. And of course, it will be active for everybody. Brad sees the cat. Luis sees the cat. Anonymous long login people. Everybody sees the cat because it's just there's no targeting active. Okay, what else do I have? I got a couple more rules in here to play around with. I have a rule called experimental features, and this is a JSON type rule. So I have a couple different variations. I have variation 1 called bleeding edge, and this is a struct of JSON that I just completely arbitrarily made up out of the recesses of my brain. Features is enabled, site is bleeding edge. This doesn't really mean anything. I just typed it in. And then I have a stable variation where features is equal to disabled and site is equal to stable. In theory, your code would do something useful with this JSON, right? So when the flag is off, serve the stable variation. When the flag is on, serve the bleeding edge variation. Perfect. So I have a little bit of targeting. In this case, I'm targeting one user. So everybody will always get the stable variation unless they're Brad Wood. And what's really cool is when you go to add a user, this automatically prompts you with all the users who have ever logged into your site. So if I wanted to make Luis, oh, check this out. Add plus schedule removal. Nice. I've never even seen this. There's so much functionality. So add Luis Mahano and remove him on Halloween. All right, how do I save? So like a save button? Oh, here we go. Just scroll down. Apply. UI fail. And look, there's a little icon there for him. Oh, nice. So you can give somebody access to, look at this. I'm learning this stuff on the fly, people. I can give Luis Mahano access to this special variation for X number of days, and it turns off automatically. Oh, man, that's awesome. I'm not going to save it, though. I love that. So right now, Brad Wood, though, gets the variation. So if we look here, let me, oh, and I didn't show you the cat, though it probably does exactly what you think it does. If we go look at our main view, here's our if statement for the image. Here's the ColdBox image. Here's the funny cat image, and it just looks like this. If get instance LD at LaunchDarkly SDK dot variation activate cool, and I default it to false. That's all I wrote in my code, right? But you already probably assumed that. Okay, so this experimental features looks like this. Get instance, LaunchDarkly SDK, variation detail, and we'll talk about that, what the difference is. Experimental features defaulted to an empty struct. And since this is coming back as a complex value, the SDK deserializes the JSON for you. So you'll get like a proper struct back. I'm just going to CF dump it, right? Data.value. Now, this is the cool thing about the detail version of the method. All of the variation methods all have a detail version, and this tells you why the variation was chosen. And that is super handy because when you're testing this and you're like, okay, I think I created it right. You put your code in and you're like, wait a minute, that's not the variation I expected. LaunchDarkly, why did you do this? All you got to do is call the variation detail method and it will tell you why it did it. So if I dump this out, right here, this is my JSON, features disabled, site stable. And the reason is variation was chosen because fall through. So it tells me which variation it chose, and it fell through to the default rule. Now, if I log in as Brad, who the rule is targeted for, now I have features enabled in site bleeding edge, and it says variation 0 was chosen, zero-based indexing, sorry, ColdFusion people, because target match. And there's an entire struct of details that have even more than this you can dump out. But this is super handy for debugging when it doesn't behave like you wanted to, and you want to know why. All you got to do is call the detail version, and you'll get your value back wrapped inside of a struct full of useful debugging information. I really like that. And there's sort of unending powerful things you can do with this JSON version. You can put anything you want in this JSON, and your website can behave in any manner it wants to with that JSON. So you can control multiple things, all with one flag being on or off, targeted towards certain people. So super handy with the JSON features. Okay, so I'm almost out of time here. So one final thing, and this is where it really gets cool, in my opinion. This is where I think your boss would want to like pull out his credit card and pay money to LaunchDarkly, if I haven't given you enough reasons already. There's another feature I haven't talked about, and it's called metrics. Oh, geez, I didn't even show you the debugger. So many cool things. I'm going to show the debugger really quick. Really quick. Let me put this. Sorry, I'm trying to get it like halvesies. Can I put you in one half the screen and you in one half the screen? Okay, so check this out. There's a debugger view. If you have one of those like itchy micromanaging like CEOs, the ones to just sit there and just watch people on the site like while they're working. I mean, he would enable the webcams if he could. This debugger page is for him. So if this takes about 30 seconds to start getting data in. If I just start refreshing the page over here, which is evaluating several feature flags, after a few seconds, look at this. We have data just flowing in real time that shows all the flag events that are happening. And I'll expand this so we can see it real quick. So the activate cool flag was evaluated 4 times. It was true every time. Experimental features was evaluated 4 times. It was this JSON every time. Oops, I clicked on it accidentally and opened up details. Go back. There we go. Welcome message. Now this is kind of boring because I'm refreshing the same user over and over again. I guess for a better example, if I was to go through and like randomly click different users, I would actually get some more variation into the data. But you can sit there and you can watch your website and you can see in real time all the feature flags being evaluated. Here we go. So check it out. 67% of the time it's this, 33% of the time it's that, 89% of the time, right? You can actually see who's on your site and what they're doing, which is pretty cool. You can filter stuff, right? There's also user events, which does the same thing as before, but this tells you what users are on your site. So if I just kind of keep clicking, we'll give this debugging window a few seconds to catch up. I don't know how LaunchDarkly processes this all behind the scenes, but I can tell you it's very low latency and it's very fast. And I'm assuming they have a whole bunch of like asynchronous message queue based stuff behind the scenes. I'm not really sure. Come on. I'm waiting for it to start showing data up. Let's keep refreshing stuff over here. Come on, LaunchDarkly, you're making me look bad. All right. I don't know why it's not showing up sometimes, like I said, it takes a little while for the data to show up. So when this page is working, it shows you all the users that are active. It shows their name and it shows the flags they're evaluating, and you can click on them and you can see their detail. So you can see who's active. And then there's also this live view of experimentation. And so that's my segue. Let's talk about experimentation. But the debugger stuff is just really cool. And I actually kind of really want to put this on a production site just to sit there and watch what's happening live. So experiments. This is where the real like enterprise functionality, in my opinion, comes in. So you have the ability to turn a feature on and turn a feature off, right? You also have the ability that I didn't talk about yet to do these like slow rollouts. And this is actually super cool. So I have another feature flag I haven't shown you yet. And this one's called product page. We have 3 variations. We have the original product page. We have the beg for money variation. And we have the free puppy variation, right? So we have the old way and then 2 new ways that we want to try. And we want to see which one works best, right? And of course, my actual values are index, beg, and puppy. And I'm going to use those in my code. You'll see how just here in a minute. So when the flag is off, I want the original product page. The flag is on, original product page. I'm going to do a breakdown here in my targeting with a percentage-based rollout. Ooh, I love these. So 50% of my users randomly chosen will get the original product page. That's my baseline, right? My control in the experiment. 25% of people will get a new version that just begs for money. And 25% of people will get a version that offers them a free puppy. And it's not just a matter of roll it out. How do we measure the success? How do we know which variation was best, right? This is like the holy grail of marketing. This is what your marketing team are like just salivating, thinking about. If only there was some way. Because I've worked at companies where people just make an educated guess, right? And they usually suck because their guesses are wrong, right? You need data. We need data, people. So I have a percentage-based rollout. So let's take a quick look at how I set this up. And this is just one of a billion ways you could make this work. So I have a product handler. I'm leaning on a couple ColdBox features here. For the sake of the experiment, I'm creating a random user every time the page loads. So user 1 through 1000. And that's because LaunchDarkly will remember the user and will remember what variation it showed them. And they see the same variation every time, right? So if Joe Bob comes and he sees the puppy page, he closes the browser, comes back the next day, he still sees the puppy page. LaunchDarkly remembers Joe Bob gets puppy, right? So in order to really test this, I needed to have 1,000 different users from LaunchDarkly's perspective. So I'm just creating this user struct, and then I'm manually passing it in to override that user provider closure in my settings. So I'm overriding the default functionality, and I'm saying, hey, LaunchDarkly, here's the user. So I've got 1,000 random users, and I call LD variation product page, defaulted to index if all heck breaks loose. And then that's going to be the name of my ColdBox view. So I do event.setView, product set view name. If you're not in the ColdBox world, just imagine it's a CF include, right? It doesn't really matter. I'm just swapping out the view file on the fly. And then I have my 3 views here. I have our default index view. I have our beg view, which has, oops, I just closed it, which has a slightly different markup. And I have our puppy view. And those are the variations I want to test side by side. So if I come over to our product page experiment, this is our default page, widgets for sale, right? Proceed to checkout. Here's some products, totally worth it. You got to find out for yourself, right? And if I keep refreshing this about 25% of the time, I'll get, actually it's not changing. Why is it not changing? Let me make sure I don't have something commented out because I was testing with this earlier. Let's see here, product, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that should be random. That should be random. Why isn't it changing? Oh, wait a minute. Make sure I didn't turn the flag off because that would be stupid of me if I turn the flag off. Yep, the flag's off. Flag's off, everybody. The experiment hasn't started. Sorry about that. Turn the flag on. See, now, if I had used the variation detail method, the debugging would have told me, hey, idiot, your flag's off. I'm like, oh, yeah, the flag's off. My bad. Okay, now the flag is on. So now our percentage-based rollout will finally kick in. So let's see if we can get some random goodness here. Okay, so here we go. So here's the puppy version, which, again, this is randomly getting chosen. Widgets for sale, free puppy, free and terribly cute puppy will be included with every sale. Don't miss this exciting furry deal, right? So I got some debugging down here that shows you the user, right? So that was user 326. Let's see, here's the fall. Oh, here we go. Here's our beg one. Please, we're desperate. We need your money. Have pity on us. We can't afford to feed our family, right? So this is the I clicked the buy now link. It doesn't take you anywhere but the homepage. So that's our beg version, right? User 991 got that one. So I can just sit here and hit refresh, and about 50% of the time I get the default one, 25% of the time I get the puppy one, 25% of the time I get the beg one, and that's all controlled by our percentage-based rollout. So how do we measure the success? This is where metrics come in. Ooh, metrics. So LaunchDarkly has this whole thing called experiments, and you can run an experiment, and an experiment combines a feature flag and the metric that measures the success of the variations all into one experiment. So I've created a metric called dollars sold. Now here's the thing. Metrics can be a conversion-based metric, which just means, did they buy the product or did the thing happen? Yes, no, right? Or metrics can be a numeric metric like number of items in cart, number of dollars sold, number of minutes on the site, right? Anything you want to track, you decide. I came up with the idea of dollars sold. I mean, not like it's an original idea. That's just what I chose to use. So I defined this metric called dollars sold. It's a custom numeric metric, and it measures how many dollars someone sold. Easy peasy mac and cheesy, right? Looks like this. You say what the unit of measure is, and then I have my success criteria. My success criteria is when it's higher than the baseline. We want to sell more dollars in the winning variation than our boring ones. And you see, I've connected this metric to the product page flag. I didn't want to bore you guys by showing you how this is all created. It's pretty self-explanatory. They have good documentation. You can figure it out not too hard. So now I create an experiment, and I have an experiment called product page. The marketing team wants to test these three variations head to head and say which is the better variation. So I choose my baseline variation. So the original product page, that's my baseline. That's what we've always had for years and years. It's the one we've got to beat. And then I combine my metric. And I say the dollars sold metric is how we're going to measure the success of each variation to see whether or not they were better or worse. Since I don't have real users nor an actual functioning shopping cart, what I've done is I've sort of simulated the behavior of my users here. So this is the magic, ld.track. This allows me to track my custom metrics. So dollars sold is just the name I came up with as the name. And I give it a metric value, which is going to be a number, which is the number of dollars worth of product that were sold. And then, of course, I'm doing so in the context of my user above. So we tie all that data together. So I came up with a very simple algorithm. And of course, you would never write this code. Your actual users would supply this. But for my test, I said, okay, the normal people will spend $50, give or take $5 in either direction. So $45 to $55 is going to be the average of what the default page gives us. Turns out people don't like it when you beg. It makes you look weak and lame. So when people see the begging page, they're going to spend up to 75% less. So I'm going to take between 1 and 75% from the original price and subtract it. But people love puppies, right? Market research has shown you can sell anything with puppies. There's actually a Dilbert cartoon about the marketing people saying, let's ship a free puppy in every box. And they're like, well, how will the puppy live? And they're like, I don't know. That'll be an ops problem for someone to solve, right? So when people see a puppy, they're going to spend up to 75% more than they would. So I'm going to add an additional 1 to 75% if it's the puppy page. And that'll kind of simulate my expected user behavior. And then at the bottom, I'm going to track dollars sold is this amount from this user, right? And obviously the dollars sold wouldn't be tracked on this page, since this is like the actual product page. You would be tracking this later on down at the end of the shopping cart, right? And LaunchDarkly is smart enough to remember, hey, this dude just sold $50. That's the guy we showed the puppy page to. LaunchDarkly remembers all that. It ties the pieces together. But we're doing it all on one page. So what you do then is you come in, you create the experiment, set the baselines, create the metric, create the flag, tie them all together, and you start recording. This takes about 10 minutes for data to come in and start being like populated. So I did this last night since it would take too long to do live, but you can do multiple iterations of this, and you can do an experiment stop the experiment, then maybe send another marketing email campaign, start a new experiment, let it run for a few hours in the experiment, and this drop down of iteration will start getting multiple items in it, showing you the data from each of your test runs, which is super cool. So for each experiment, you could do multiple test runs. So here's all the good stuff. Here's our original baseline right here. I'll explain what this all means. So original product page, 589 people. And I literally just whacked the F5 key for about 20 minutes when I did this, simulated a bunch of user traffic. So about 50% of the total, about almost 600 people got the original page, and they spent on average $49, which is exactly what you would expect based on how I set up the math. What's kind of interesting is the longer I ran my experiment, the more these numbers solidified just because of the way, random values average out. So this is my baseline. The beg for money one had about 25%. People only spent an average of $30. And here's a cool little kind of confidence interval that shows you where the data falls. Because in real life, your data will probably have more variations. So this is on average $19 less than the baseline. Our free puppy page had about the same number of people, 25%. They spent on average $69. And here's a little kind of confidence interval of how separated that data was, which is an average of $19 above the baseline. And of course, this shouldn't be surprising to us because I programmed it to work this way. But you can see this all really nice. This p-value is a probability value. And basically, you want this to be really low. That means this is how confident LaunchDarkly is that this data is on the money. Right? If the data is kind of all over the place, that is too much random variation you're not accounting for, you can't really trust the experiment. And what's cool is LaunchDarkly chose the winning variation for me. Green check mark on the free puppy. LaunchDarkly is like, yeah, this guy, use this one. He's way better. And it's got this big red X on the beg for money. LaunchDarkly is like, no, do not use the beg for money page. It was terrible. It lost you money. So these experiments are things that I never even had considered you could do with feature flag management. And when I saw this kind of stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, this is why people would pay money and use a dedicated library, because I could write this, but it would take me months to approximate all of this equivalent functionality when, LaunchDarkly has this out of the box, right? You just got to sign up. And what's actually cool, I have an enterprise account I'm testing with. Thank you to the LaunchDarkly people. They totally hooked me up with a year trial of an enterprise account so I could finish developing the SDK and testing things. You can their pricing is like a slider scale, so you can just pay per as you use. So you can have a basic professional account and say I want to do 2 experiments, and you pay $10 per experiment or something along those lines. So I kind of like their pricing model. It lets you pay for what you use. But this is where the stuff is super cool. The ability to have these multiple variations, and then the ability for you to tie an actual meaningful metric to it, and then run a head-to-head comparison and say who wins. And then from that, the marketing team says, okay, the jury's in, the verdict is done. We're going to use the free puppy page, right? So there's a lot more, but that's all I have time for. And hopefully that's kind of given an explanation of this. Again, if you guys want to just play with this, go to this repository here. I'll tweet it out. Clone this, run box install, box server start. You can kind of play around with it. You can get a 14-day trial if you want to get an actual LaunchDarkly account. But it's super cool, and it kind of changed my mind about what you can do with feature flags and kind of the robustness of the targeting of users and the user segments and all that really cool stuff. So with that, any questions?
While we wait for you to look at the chat to catch up on things, say thank you for the effort you guys have put into creating that SDK so that CFML folks can start taking advantage of it.
Yeah, and thanks again to Mary Jo Sminkley from CF Web Tools and her client Classic Industries. They paid for us to write the SDK, and it's open source, so you get to use it for free. Well, you got to pay LaunchDarkly, but you can use the part that I wrote for free.
Very nice.
And if you guys ever run across a Java library that you wish there was a ColdFusion SDK for, you can always reach out to Ortis and we can talk about helping you out with that. Okay, I don't see any other questions back in the chat, just a few comments.
Yep, and if anybody hasn't been paying attention to those comments, I did offer the link to that SDK that Brad has created that's on GitHub. I also gave links to the pricing page for LaunchDarkly and an API page because people were asking, can you create the feature flags via a REST API, and I gave a link with that documentation. And then I've also given some links with more on the experimentation feature that Brad was so excited about the past 15 minutes. I didn't want to interrupt him that we were going long. No, it's okay. It was exciting.
When I saw the experimentation stuff, I was like a kid in the candy store.
Right.
Like,
we could tell.
So amazing.
And that's why I shared those links, because there's lots more on it. If you loved it too, you listeners, if you loved it too, check out those links I gave both to a tutorial on the LaunchDarkly site and also several blog posts they've done on that experimentation feature. Lots of coolness. But yeah, I don't know that there's any outstanding questions. If anybody felt there was one that he hasn't answered, go ahead and repeat it.
All right. Yeah. And you guys can always reach out on Twitter if you think of something later, or on the ColdFusion Slack team. You can ping me. I'll be happy to answer any questions about it. Or if there's any features that aren't in the SDK you want to ask about. So. All right. I think that's it. I'm not seeing anything.
I just shared your Twitter handle for those who can't keep track of the combination of letters and numbers. Have you ever shared where the 429S came from?
When I was in high school, I was dual enrolled in some college courses, the local 2-year school in West Plains, Missouri. And I was able to go to their computer lab, and I had an email address, which I had to check using a program called Pine via Telnet. And I could get on the internet, and I didn't own a computer at the time. This was in like 1997, 1998. And so my username in their Linux system was BDW429S, which was my initials, part of a student ID number, and an S for student. And when I started signing up for things like Hotmail and Gmail, Brad would always be taken, and Brad would be taken. But BDW429S was never taken. So I just used it for everything because it was a guaranteed username I could always sign up for. Nobody would ever have it taken. So if you ever see that online, it's probably me. No one else uses that I know of.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, it does not look like there's any other questions. So yeah, we're here at a minute or hour and 20 minutes. So be a good time to go ahead and wrap it up. Very much again, Brad, for the intro to it all and the efforts on it, and everybody for your participation. And we'll have another session for sure in a couple weeks, and maybe even one next week. So keep an eye out on the ColdFusion Meetup site, or sign up there for the notifications, and you'll hear about it. And then we'll tweet about it from the CF Meetup Twitter account as well. CF Meetup. Yep. Cool. All right, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie.
You bet. See you, sir.
Bye.